Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Need to book a flight without breaking the bank? Low Cost Air is your discount supermarket for all airline tickets. Whether you're flying American, Delta, United, Specialized International Carriers, or any other airline, they've got you covered at prices that will make your wallet happy. And here's the best part. They guarantee you'll speak to a real human being within 60 seconds. No frustrating automated systems or endless holds. To get this exclusive deal, you must call 866-613-3100. I'll repeat that for you, 866-613-3100. One more time so you can grab your phone, 866-613-3100. Now, give it a call, start saving on your next flight.
Tax season's here, and the Tax Doctor's team of experts can work directly with the IRS so you keep more of your hard-earned money. They know the tax laws inside and out, and they will fight aggressively to save your cash. If you owe the IRS a substantial amount and you want to protect your finances, call right now for a free consultation to learn how they can put money back in your pocket. To get this expert tax relief help, you have to call 877-208-9550. Let me repeat that. 877-208-9550. I'll give you that number one more time. You have to call this number. 877-208-9550. Don't let the IRS take what's yours. Make the call today.
Hello, and welcome to This Week Explained, your essential download on the global stories making headlines. It's Sunday, April 20th. Before I let Kervin ramble on about our ever-changing world, a quick favor. If you enjoy getting your weekly analysis here, please hit that follow or subscribe button right now, wherever you're listening. It takes just a second and really helps us reach more people. And hey, if you really want to support the show, leaving us a rating and a quick review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify is like gold. And it helps others find us. Now, powering our discussion today, and hopefully your morning brew tomorrow, is our fantastic sponsor, Fresh Roasted Coffee. Folks, if you're serious about incredible coffee delivered fresh, you have to check them out. They've got an amazing selection. Use the link right there in our show notes. And here's the kicker. Enter the code THISWEEK, that's THISWEEK, at checkout to get a whopping 20% off your entire first order. Seriously, it's the best coffee money can buy. Treat yourself. This Week Explained is proudly part of the amazing Leon Media Network. Check out the other podcasts on this network at leonmedianetwork.com. All right, let's get straight into the stories that are shaping your world. And to be honest, it's the whole reason why you're here, isn't it? This week, we're breaking down the latest on the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, a ground offensive in Yemen, shocking information on U.S.-Israeli relations, and a new revelation that Chinese satellite companies have been helping the Houthis attacking ships in the Red Sea. All right, we need to dive right into the latest developments in the war in Ukraine. Focusing on the ongoing ceasefire talks, the role of global powers like the United States, Europe, and Russia, and some controversial statements that have stirred the pot. Let's start with the big picture here, Kervin. There have been several high-level meetings recently, including talks in Paris and an upcoming meeting in London. So what is the goal of these discussions?
Well, the primary goal of these meetings right now is to revive those stalled ceasefire efforts. All sides want to work toward a durable peace in Ukraine. That's the one thing. Now, French President Emmanuel Macron, he brought together senior U.S., European, and Ukrainian officials with the sole focus of finding common ground for a ceasefire. But they also got into some talks about lasting peace by discussing security guarantees for Ukraine.
Security guarantees sounds very promising, but what exactly does that mean?
Well, look, what it means in this context is that we are essentially talking about commitments from other nations to ensure Ukraine's sovereignty. That's in light of the fact that we know that Putin's going to be aggressive in the future, and so Ukraine needs those security guarantees. Now, the U.S. has indicated it is willing to discuss these guarantees, but the specifics depend on achieving a complete ceasefire first. Now, European leaders are also pushing for a multinational military contingent to support Ukraine if a ceasefire is reached, but the challenge here lies in getting Russia to agree to any meaningful terms.
Well, speaking of challenges, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been vocal about all of his concerns, particularly regarding U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. So what is going on there?
Yeah, this was a really interesting development this week. So Zelensky publicly accused Witkoff of spreading Russian narratives, either intentionally or unintentionally. Now, this criticism stems from Witkoff's recent comment suggesting that a peace deal might hinge on the status of 5 Ukrainian regions. That's Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, and Crimea. Now, Zelensky sees this as aligning with Russian rhetoric, which frames these territories as negotiable, despite them being internationally recognized as part of Ukraine.
Well, can you explain to our listeners how Witkoff has responded to this?
Well, in his defense, he has not directly addressed the criticism. He's continued to work behind the scenes for a peace deal, but he has continued to emphasize the importance of finding a peace deal. He's also suggested that resolving the conflict could reshape U.S.-Russia relations and create economic opportunities in the region. Now, his approach has raised eyebrows in some situations, especially given his background in real estate rather than diplomacy or military strategy.
Well, it sounds like there is a lot of tension between the U.S. and Ukraine right now, but I mean...
Yeah, we saw that publicly a few months ago.
We saw that publicly, for sure. Is this affecting the ceasefire efforts?
Yeah, it's definitely complicating them. The U.S. has been pressuring Ukraine to make these concessions, including a controversial proposal that would hand over significant revenue from Ukraine's natural resources and infrastructure to a U.S. investment fund. Now, this has understandably caused friction between the two nations, but President Trump has said that the deal for those minerals will be signed next week. We've heard this before from the president, and we saw, how that got very publicly derailed. So not holding my breath for that.
Not holding any breath.
Not holding any breath.
Not even
I wouldn't even hold someone else's breath
Yeah.
for it. So, yeah. Look, we don't know what's going to happen in this next week. And quite honestly, the onus is on Russia right now. I think a lot more conversation should be around forcing Russia into some sort of agreement. Because within this same timeline, Russia continues to escalate its aggression, as seen in the recent missile attack on Sumy. That killed 34 civilians, even though, they've talked about a ceasefire on infrastructure, right?
Right.
These actions undermine any progress towards a ceasefire.
And what about Europe's role in all of this? Are they aligned with the U.S. approach, or are they leaning more towards Ukraine?
Well, they're trying to strike a balance here. Macron and other European leaders are working very closely with the U.S. They're also advocating for a more coordinated European response to this situation. For example, Britain and France have proposed a European-led, quote, reassurance, end quote, this reassurance force to be deployed in Ukraine if a ceasefire is achieved. But they acknowledge that for any of this to get done, U.S. support would be crucial for that force to be effective.
Well, it seems like there is a lot of diplomatic maneuvering happening right now. But what about Russia? How is Moscow responding to all of these efforts?
Yeah, they have Putin, Russia, all that. They've shown very little interest in genuine peace talks. Now, Putin has laid out conditions that make a ceasefire nearly impossible for Ukraine to agree to. That's like demanding that Ukraine halt mobilization and weapons supplies during any ceasefire period.
But they don't have to do that.
They don't.
No.
Because they're the aggressor, and the aggressor always
The bully.
gets what they want.
Yeah.
Yeah, look. Russia's also tied certain agreements, like the Black Sea shipping ceasefire. They kind of tied those to the lifting of Western sanctions. And that's something that's a non-starter for Europe at the moment.
So where does this leave us? Is there any realistic path to peace right now?
No, I really don't think so. And I went on NTD on Friday, and I said just as much as that. The path to peace looks very uncertain. But, I mean, the main culprit is Vladimir Putin. That's the person that needs to be called out right now by the president of the United States. Putin does not care about peace. He cares about his ultimate goal of enveloping Ukraine into the Russian Federation. And let's not overlook the fact that the U.S. and Europe are struggling to present a united front. And internal tensions, like the criticism of Witkoff, that's not helping either. So unless there is a significant shift in strategy, particularly from the United States here, the chances of a durable ceasefire are very slim.
Well, this is a very sobering assessment, but before we wrap up, I want to touch on one more point. Zelensky recently claimed that China is supplying weapons to Russia. So what do we know about that?
Oh, yeah, thank you for bringing that one up. Didn't want to skip over that. Zelensky actually said that China is not only supplying weapons to Russia, but may also be involved in weapons production on Russian soil. Now, Beijing has not responded to these allegations, but has previously positioned itself as a neutral party in this conflict. So if these claims are true, that would mark a significant escalation in China's involvement, even more so than the Chinese nationals being found fighting for Russia. And it could further complicate the geopolitical landscape.
I feel like China's plausible deniability in all of these conflicts is just slipping away bit by bit.
That's the beauty of the 24/7 social media, open source intelligence timeline that we're in right now.
Yeah. So, okay. That wasn't the update that we were all hoping for on this conflict, but we will be keeping an eye on it, of course, and giving you the latest updates next week, probably in a more timely fashion. We had a lot of travel delays that prevented us from putting out this episode sooner, so we appreciate your patience. For now, I want to shift to the latest developments in Gaza. The war, which began in October 2023, has escalated significantly in recent weeks, and I feel like I've said that every single week.
And it's true. Every week it escalates more and more.
The humanitarian situation is, I don't even think dire properly explains what's going on there. Let's start with the big picture here. What is the current state of the conflict?
Well, as you said, it's intensifying, and Israel has intensified its military campaign against Hamas. And their stated goal is the same it always has been: completely disarming and destroying the group. Over 51,000 people have been killed in Gaza since the war began, but that's according to Hamas-run health authorities. The percentage of that are Hamas fighters that have also been killed, but it is important to bring up that a majority of these are civilians who are dying because of this. And the humanitarian crisis gets worse every single day. Every week we talk about it, the humanitarian crisis is worse. In the past few weeks, Israel has seized large portions of Gaza. They've designated about 30% of the territory as an operational security perimeter. And Defense Minister Israel Katz made it clear that Israeli troops are going to remain in these so-called security zones even after the war ends. Now, the idea from Katz is they want to create a buffer to protect Israeli communities, but you can't just gloss over the fact that it's displaced 500,000 additional Palestinians just to create this buffer zone, and it leaves them with really nowhere safe to go.
Okay, so what about the ceasefire negotiations? There have been reports of proposals and rejections, so where do things stand?
Yeah, look, as of this moment, the ceasefire talks are at a standstill. So Hamas rejected Israel's latest proposal. That proposal offered a 6-week truce in exchange for the release of half of the remaining hostages and then the disarmament of Hamas. Now, Khalil al-Hayya was the Hamas chief negotiator. He's been very clear they're not going to accept partial deals right now. Hamas is demanding a full withdrawal of Israeli forces.
That's not going to happen.
Right. They want the lifting of the blockade.
Also not going to happen.
Not going to happen, but it's what's causing a lot of this increased humanitarian crisis right now because no food can get.
Yeah.
But what it also shows, it's not just Israel who's blocking the entry of aid, right? all factions are blocking this. Hamas is stealing aid when it comes through.
Right.
Israel's blocking it from coming through.
Right.
It's terrible. Now, they've asked for all this. They've asked for a guarantee that Israel's going to pay for the reconstruction that Hamas is going to be a part of. And at the same time, Israel maintains its hardline stance.
Right.
Israel Katz has stated that the blockade is going to remain in place because he wants to pressure Hamas into releasing all of the hostages. This blockade has been in, I think, since early March, and it's completely cut off food, medicine, all other supplies from entering Gaza.
Well, we're hearing about an almost complete humanitarian collapse in Gaza, nearly 70% under evacuation orders, according to the UN. Hospitals are overwhelmed, starvation is occurring on a massive level, and there are rumblings about mass graves. Simultaneously, Israeli airstrikes continue, resulting in significant civilian deaths, like the recent killing of 24 people, including children. While Israel states they target terror sites, how are these actions being justified given the sheer scale of the humanitarian crisis and the civilian cost?
All right, well, I'm going to just go with the Israeli justification for this now from an international perspective, obviously. There are dire concerns about what's going on here, but officially, Israel's justification has been consistent. And it's been echoed by the IDF as well. The operations exclusively target Hamas military infrastructure, things like command centers, tunnels, weapon storage, also active terrorist cells within buildings. And they often publicize these figures. They've claimed, for example, to have killed hundreds of terrorists in recent pushes. However, and this gets to the heart of the matter. The devastating reality on the ground starkly contrasts with the Israeli narrative. Civilian toll isn't just collateral damage, it's reaching catastrophic levels. I've seen reports, these are verified reports of entire multi-generational families just being wiped out in a single Israeli strike. Now, compounding this tragedy, these attacks are frequently hitting the very areas where displaced Palestinians have been told to seek refuge by the Israelis, or they're hitting areas previously considered somewhat safer. Now, what you alluded to, which is the recent strike on the Al-Mawasi tent camp, reportedly killing those dozens of people, including many children. It's just one example of the disconnect that we're seeing here now. While Israel typically states it is investigating specific high-profile incidents like this one, the persistent pattern of high civilian casualties resulting from strikes on claimed terror sites raises profound questions about Israel's targeting protocols, adherence to principles of distinction and proportionality in international law. And this is especially in this intensely dense urban environment. People have nowhere to go.
Okay, so what about the hostages? That has been a central issue since the war began.
Yeah, it has been. It should be on the forefront of the Israelis' minds. The hostage situation is critical. It's deeply emotional. It's a deeply emotional part of this conflict. I think there are around 59 hostages still being held.
Are they alive?
About 24, we think.
Okay.
We being people who are looking
Intel community.
The intel community, yeah. 24 are still alive. Now, while the Israeli government consistently states that securing their release is the primary aim of all of this, there's considerable and growing criticism from within Israeli society. We talked about the Hostages and Missing Families Forum before. They represent the relatives of the hostages, and they've been particularly vocal throughout this entire time. They publicly accused the government of prioritizing military objectives or territorial control over tangible progress on bringing the hostages home. Now, externally, that means internationally, pressure is also being applied through calculated tactics by the captors. There was a recent video from Palestinian Islamic Jihad that showed the Israeli-German hostage Ram Broslovsky. And it showed him appealing for release, right? A video to kind of put out to the international community. It's a clear example of how captors use the captives to kind of generate a response from the international community. And this is a known strategy. And what happened here is we actually saw the intended effect when Germany's ambassador to Israel subsequently called for immediate action in this particular hostages case. But despite these internal pressures and external diplomatic efforts, a major breakthrough for the hostages has unfortunately not yet been achieved.
Well, it sounds to me like there's no clear path forward. So, is there any hope for a resolution?
And no, the two sides, unfortunately, are nowhere near an agreement. Hamas is going to continue to insist on a full Israeli withdrawal. That's not going to happen. An end to the blockade. That's not going to happen. And Israel is going to focus on maintaining its security zones and continuing its military campaign. Israel has there's no pressure on Israel to stop this. There's no pressure on Hamas to stop this. So until that happens, and until there's a significant shift in either side's position, this conflict is likely going to continue.
It is a devastating situation, and it feels like the civilians in Gaza are bearing the brunt of it. Not feels like it. That's what's happening.
Right.
As we have said on multiple occasions, this is not just a military conflict. It is a humanitarian disaster. Well, obviously, we're going to continue talking about this in future episodes, but for now, we will shift to U.S. involvement in a ground offensive in Yemen against the Houthi group. But before we dive in, let's take a quick break for a message from our sponsors. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Conservative investors, what does the name Reagan mean to you? Reagan was the ultimate conservative. We at the Reagan Gold Group consider ourselves the ultimate conservative gold company. Do you as a conservative investor see the storm clouds of chaos and uncertainty approaching? We do. The stock market hates uncertainty, and there is lots of chaos on the horizon. High inflation, unsustainable debt, and political tensions are rattling the markets and creating volatility. Does your portfolio have an anchor in this storm? You have car insurance, homeowners insurance, and life insurance. But what about your retirement savings, your 401k? We urge all fellow conservative investors to learn about the one asset that could help keep your nest egg from cracking under all this economic pressure: gold. Call the Reagan Gold Group right now to get your free wealth protection kit and ask us how to get up to $15,000 in bonus coins.
If you've turned 65 recently like me, it's important you find a Medicare Advantage plan that gives you the coverage you're looking for. But finding one can be difficult. The best thing I did, and I suggest you do the same, is call a licensed insurance agent and let them walk you through your Medicare Advantage plan options. There are so many benefits you have access to, so make the call now and let the representatives explain everything to you. Our licensed insurance agents can offer you a variety of Medicare Advantage plans. Plus, the call is free, the information is free, and there's no obligation to enroll. We're here to make it easy for you to select a Medicare Advantage plan that may work for your needs. Finding a Medicare Advantage plan can be easy if you do what I did. Make a quick call right now to learn more. Thank you. Call 877-476-1681. That's 877-476-1681. Call now.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back, listeners. As we said before the break, there are reports of potential U.S. involvement in a ground offensive against the Houthi group, as well as denials from key regional players like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So, Kervin, can you give us a quick overview of the situation in Yemen and why it is back in the headlines?
Yes, Yemen's been embroiled in conflict for many, many years. The most recent was a civil war that started in 2014. That's when the Houthi group, which we all know is an Iranian proxy, they seized the capital of Sana'a. That led to a Saudi-led coalition intervening in 2015 to support Yemen's internationally recognized government. Now, the war caused immense suffering. The United Nations called it the world's worst humanitarian crisis. There was a truce in 2022 that did bring some relief to the humanitarian crisis, but tensions have been simmering for years, and recent reports suggest that the conflict could reignite.
And these reports are tied to potential U.S. involvement, correct? Like, what exactly is being said?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The Wall Street Journal recently reported that Yemeni factions are planning a ground offensive along the Red Sea coast, and those plans are possibly involving U.S. support. Now, the report also mentioned that the UAE had raised this plan with the United States, but Bloomberg added that Yemeni forces opposed to the Houthis are in talks with the U.S. and their Gulf allies, meaning the Middle East, the Gulf and the Middle East, about this potential ground operation in Yemen. Now, to bring both sides onto this one, both Saudi Arabia and the UAE have denied these claims from Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal. They called them unsubstantiated and false.
So the UAE and Saudi Arabia are distancing themselves from these reports? Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
okay,
they are.
So what do we know about their current roles in Yemen?
Well, we have to remember that both the Saudis and the UAE were major players in Yemen through that coalition. They were heavily invested in Yemen. Then we saw a change. The UAE started scaling back its forces quite a bit in 2019. Saudi Arabia took a little bit longer, but they also significantly wound down their military efforts by 2022, particularly once that truce and those peace talks gained some traction. Now, the key issue they faced was keeping their Yemeni allies unified. There were real divisions here, and sometimes Saudi Arabia and the UAE actually found themselves backing these competing groups on the ground, and that helps no one out. Like that kind of internal competition doesn't help the coalition achieve its goals. So where are we now? It looks like both Riyadh and Abu Dhabi are taking a much more careful approach to Yemen these days. And a big factor in that calculation is likely their recent diplomatic thaw with the country of Iran.
Well, that's interesting. What about the U.S.? How do we fit into this? Like, how credible are these reports of potential involvement in a ground offensive?
Look, the U.S. has not even confirmed, or the U.S. government, the Trump administration, has not confirmed any involvement in this. And officials have been tight-lipped. I haven't been on the Signal messaging app to see if they're putting anything in there, but otherwise it's been tight-lipped. Pentagon hasn't responded to requests for comments on much of anything, let alone this. And statements from U.S. officials have emphasized operational security, also known as OPSEC. However, I will say there are indications that American private contractors are advising Yemeni factions in Yemen, and the U.S. has escalated airstrikes against the Houthis in recent months. So while direct involvement in a ground offensive with U.S. military is unconfirmed, there is a history of U.S. support for anti-Houthi operations.
Okay, you mentioned airstrikes. So what is the U.S. trying to achieve with these actions?
Yeah, the U.S. has been targeting the Houthis in response to their attacks on Red Sea shipping. The Houthis claim that these acts are an act of solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. Now, President Trump recently escalated these strikes. He's warned the Houthis to stop their attacks or face severe consequences. The U.S. likely sees these strikes as a way to protect the shipping lanes and deter further Houthi aggression.
But as you said earlier, the Houthis have withstood years of bombardment. So why has the coalition, with all of its resources, struggling to defeat them?
Yeah, and that's the key question here. The Houthis are deeply entrenched in Yemen right now. They have significant local support in the areas that they have control of. We saw this with Al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula, or AQAP. In the places that are controlled, they get significant local support. Now, the coalition's efforts were also hampered by infighting among Yemeni factions. That made it difficult to maintain a unified front. Additionally, look, just like any other terrorist organization working with guerrilla warfare, they've adapted to years of conflict, and it makes them resilient and also a formidable opponent.
Okay, so what about the humanitarian impact? If the conflict reignites, what could that mean for the people of Yemen?
Well, that would be absolutely devastating. Yemen is already the poorest country in the Middle East, and the war has pushed millions to the brink of famine. The humanitarian crisis is one of the worst in modern history, according to the United Nations, and any escalation is just going to make that even worse.
Before we wrap up, I want to touch on the Houthis' motivations. You mentioned their attacks on Red Sea shipping are tied to the Gaza conflict. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, so the Houthis have stated that their attacks on Red Sea shipping are meant to pressure Israel to end its military campaign in Gaza. During a recent ceasefire, the Houthis upheld their commitment to stop these attacks, but they resumed after Israel blocked aid to Gaza. Now, this highlights how regional dynamics in a place like Gaza, the Israel-Palestine conflict, are influencing the situation all the way into Yemen.
That actually brings us to a fascinating and frankly concerning development making headlines. The U.S. State Department has put a Chinese satellite company, Changguang Satellite Technology, squarely in the crosshairs, linking them directly to attacks hitting U.S. interests. So what is the story behind this accusation?
Hey, look, it's definitely significant, honestly. The U.S. State Department's claim is that this company, Changguang, which they point out, as we point out on this podcast, all Chinese companies have connections to the Chinese
The PLA.
And the PLA, yes, all of those. And so the State Department claims that that company has been supplying satellite photos to the Houthis in Yemen, who are, of course, backed by Iran. Now, the alleged purpose of all this is to help the Houthis better target ships in the Red Sea, including U.S. Navy vessels that the PLA may be in a conflict with real soon. Now, the language from the U.S., I will say, was very strong. They called it unacceptable, and they layered criticism onto China itself for allowing this to happen. They mentioned that attempts to resolve this quietly with Beijing have not worked.
Yet another conflict in which China's plausible deniability is getting chipped away.
Yes,
bit
right.
by bit. Okay, so obviously that is a very, very serious accusation. What does this mean for U.S. interests in the region, particularly in the Red Sea?
It is a significant concern, Tiana. The Red Sea is a critical maritime route for global trade. It also is critical for trade through energy supplies, and any threat to these shipping lanes, especially one targeting U.S. or allied vessels, has the potential to destabilize the region and then also disrupt international commerce. Now, by providing the Houthis with satellite imagery, Changguang Satellite Technology is essentially enabling precision attacks. This escalates the threat level for U.S. forces, but it also elevates the threat level for civilian commercial shipping in the area.
The State Department also made some strong comments about China's broader role in global conflicts. They said that while China tries to present itself as a global peacemaker, it is clear that Beijing and its companies are supporting regimes like Russia, North Korea, and Iran, like I've mentioned several times in this episode, that, their ability to say, we're not doing anything. We want peace on the planet. So what do you make of all of this?
Yeah, I think that particular statement highlights a key aspect of China's foreign policy strategy. So on the surface, Beijing, like you said, tries to portray itself as this, we're just some neutral actor. Even sometimes they'll portray themselves as the mediator in global conflicts. But as we know, behind the scenes, Chinese companies, like we said before, all of which have ties to the Chinese Communist Party, the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, ties into that CCP as well. And both of those are providing economic, technical, and sometimes military support to regimes that are adversarial to the United States and its allies. Now, this duality is a hallmark of China's approach to geopolitics. This is where it seeks to expand its influence, while their ultimate goal is to undermine U.S. interests.
Well, it sounds like this is not just about the Houthis then. This is part of a larger pattern of behavior by China.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. This is not an isolated incident. China's support for regimes like Iran, North Korea, like we mentioned today in Russia, this is all part of a broader strategy to challenge U.S. dominance on the global stage. So by backing these regimes, backing the proxies from Iran, China is creating a network of influence that they want to counterbalance U.S. power. Now, the Houthis are just one example of how this strategy plays out in practice.
But I bet China wishes that their ties would have stayed private.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's you.
Do you think it's having the same effect now that this is all public information?
I think it is because I know you talk about plausible deniability. You've said it quite a few
12 times.
And you're correct on that. They do still have plausible deniability, even though we all know what's going on here. We can see it in the open. We can see it in public. It is what an authoritarian regime does because their own people, so the people of China, do not have access to a lot of the things that we here in the United States, our great friends in Canada, New Zealand, have access to, right? We talked about it with TikTok. China, ByteDance owns TikTok, and that means the CCP owns TikTok, but Chinese people do not have access to TikTok.
They have Red Note. They
have Red Note, which is very much regulated by the Chinese Communist Party. So while TikTok is free to go put out any propaganda, anyone can go on TikTok and put out propaganda.
Yeah.
If we had a TikTok, we could just put out
whatever.
This Week Explained propaganda.
Yeah.
You can't do that in China. So it allows for the plausible deniability to the Chinese people. Now, not so much for the international community, but what does China care? They think the international community, especially the West, the global West, is a great evil and should be taken down anyway.
Good point. Good point. I know that brief period of time whenever people didn't have, very brief period of time where people didn't have access to TikTok here and they were losing their minds and they were downloading Red Note. This is a funny little sidebar thing, but our eldest daughter downloaded it because she wanted to see what it was all about, and people kept messaging her and saying, "Hi, I'm your spy. I missed you so much."
Yeah. Well, if you want to get into the Red Note thing just a little bit here before we move on to the rest of the episode, what the problem happened with Red Note was that the CCP then had an issue because, yes, the Red Note's very highly regulated, but the Americans signing up for it and putting out information, not propaganda, but just information, it was getting to Chinese people, and they were actually becoming friends with these Americans and going, wait, what is happening?
Yeah.
And they were like, no, this is how this is. And the opposite was true, right? Chinese people were showing them what a place like Shanghai looked like, or Beijing, and these American teenagers who maybe have only seen propaganda about China were going, wait, what? These cities look amazing.
Right.
And there's tons of technology in them. So the CCP actually shut down a lot of Red Note for Americans because propaganda was getting out to their own people about what the CCP is doing.
Or just not propaganda. You said not propaganda, just information.
Sorry. Thank you for that. Just information.
All right, let's circle back to what we were supposed to be talking about, which was not Red Note.
Thank you, Tim.
The State Department mentioned that the U.S. had actually engaged with Beijing on the issue of the CCP and Changguang satellite technology helping the Houthis, but it's still continued despite the talks. So why do you think China has not acted to stop this?
That's an excellent question, actually. And I think there are a few possibilities behind this, or a few possible reasons. One thing is China probably sees this as a low-cost way to challenge U.S. interests without direct confrontation. Gray war. So you've got these gray zone warfare kind of pieces to it. And so by supporting proxies like the Houthis, Beijing can exert influence in key regions like the Middle East, while maintaining, once again, Tiana's favorite word, or the word of the week.
word of the day.
The phrase of the day. Plausible deniability. Almost put it as a word there. Plausibility. We won't do that. So, yeah. I do think Beijing kind of thinks that they still have plausible deniability in this. Another thing is China likely views its relationship with Iran as strategically important, especially as both of the countries face U.S. sanctions and pressure. So supporting Iran's proxies could be a way for China to strengthen that partnership. And one last thing, I think, is that it is possible that Beijing simply doesn't feel compelled to act here. Given the current state of U.S.-China relations, they don't think they have to do anything because those relations are strained because of tariffs.
Tariffs.
That's the first time we mentioned tariffs this week. It was all last week.
That's true.
We said tariffs about 100 times.
Tariffs was the word of the day last week.
And so now it's plausible deniability.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, the relations right now between U.S. and China are heavily strained.
Well, speaking of U.S.-China relations, this accusation comes at a time when tensions between the two countries is already high, particularly over trade, those lovely tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
So how does this latest development fit into the context of their rivalry?
Yeah, I think it's all part of China's plan to attempt to distract the U.S. from PLA actions in the Pacific and South China Sea. I read today, but earlier this week, apparently, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth got a briefing on the most likely course of action from the PLA to take over Taiwan. Do you remember, I think we talked about it last week, the 3 ways that China could overwhelm Taiwan or invade Taiwan?
Yeah.
It looks like the most plausible one right now to the Defense Department and the intelligence community within the United States is that lightning
So the scary
attack.
one?
No, that's the second one, which I kind of said on the episode was their most likely, where they use a lightning advance and get onto the shores of Taiwan
And just hope
hope they can envelop it.
before people can get there to help them.
Exactly. They're looking at enveloping and taking over the capital of
Are
Taiwan.
they still looking at doing it within the next couple months?
I have not seen any more on
Was it 6 months?
6
they
months.
said?
Yeah. I still think it'll happen
2026?
2026, maybe 2027 at the latest. I think that's the latest that we're looking at this.
Okay.
And they are looking to envelop Taiwan, they're looking to capture the capital within 14 days.
But allies could get there in 14 days.
That's going to be the big question, right? So if the U.S. Navy is fractured because it's in multiple confrontations with Iran and the Houthis.
So you think that's part of the reason?
I do think that's a lot of the reason why we're speeding up this timeline for Xi Jinping.
But also why maybe part of the reason China is helping these other conflicts kind of get kicked off?
You're looking at it absolutely right. It is part of that reason because...
distraction tactic.
It's a distraction tactic. It has moved some carrier strike group, which we call CSG, carrier strike group, from the Indo-Pacific into the Red Sea to help with this fighting with the Houthis.
Those CSGs can't be in Taiwan
Correct.
in a timely fashion. Okay.
That is absolutely correct. It's also part of the reason that, Panama Canal, right? We talked about that. If the U.S. Navy doesn't have access to free flow through the Panama Canal, can they get there within 14 days and prevent an attack? And all of that to just say that the U.S. and China are locked in this strategic competition that spans trade, technology, military power, but also influence in global institutions. So accusations like this one reinforce the narrative that China is not just a competitor, they're also a destabilizing force in global affairs. Now, for the U.S., this provides further justification for its efforts to counter China's influence, whether that be through economic measures like tariffs or through military partnerships in regions like the Indo-Pacific and the Middle East.
Right. That's definitely a lot for Washington, Beijing, and frankly, the rest of the world to grapple with. Before we wrap up, looking forward, what are the main questions you'll be asking? Like the things that tell us where this is heading?
I think there are three big questions right now that are hanging in the air. Now, the most immediate is, what's the U.S. follow-through here? Are we going to see tangible consequences for Changguang satellite technology? And that's just beyond the sharp words from the United States. That's going to be a crucial question to ask. Then the spotlight swings to China. Is Beijing going to change course, or are they going to double down?
I suspect that.
I suspect China's going to double down as well, Tiana. I think they see this as an opportunity to push back against U.S. pressure. And then finally, I think the fundamental question to all of this is, how does this particular moment ripple through the U.S.-China dynamic? It's not just about satellites and Houthis. It's another pulse check on the global competition between the two leading global powers. And every incident like this adds a new layer of tension or calculation.
Carvin, as always, thank you for breaking down all of these topics. This is a situation that could have massive implications for the region and the world, and I'm sure we will be revisiting it in future episodes. Is there anything else you want to discuss?
Nope, that's it for me. Anything you want to talk about?
Who are you talking to? Thank you so much for listening to This Week Explained. We hope you found it both informative and engaging. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. For in-depth coverage of these stories and more, be sure to follow us on social media at This Week Explained.
Tiana, thank you so much. And until next week, stay safe out there.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.